Good afternoon, everyone. Let me hear you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming here today. Really appreciate it. And I'm happy to be kicking off our session on sexual potpourri. And hopefully we'll be fragrant, but in a good way and not in a sensory overwhelming way. So this is Sexuality and the Spectrum, lessons on sex, dating, and love, autism style. If any of you are familiar with the show Love American Style, this is your 1960s pop culture reference for the day. So very happy to be here. So disclosure, no relevant financial or non-financial disclosures or conflicts of interest related to the material in this presentation. This is a QR code. If you scan this with your phone, you'll be able to ask questions using Slido. You can ask them anonymously, and I'll be keeping track of them here on my phone. So if there's something you don't feel comfortable asking out loud, although you're at a conference about sex, I don't know why you wouldn't be uncomfortable, but if you're not for whatever reason, I'll have them right here. So if everybody's good scanning, okay, any phones, good. Okay, so just going to talk about some of the goals for my presentation today. I'm going to kind of dispel a lot of the misconceptions around the way that relationships and sexuality are experienced by autistic people. So there are a lot of these that often preclude conversations about sexuality and autism from happening, and it's important that we navigate those in order to be more effective in supporting neurodivergent individuals and patients. I'm also going to highlight some of the barriers that presently exist to physicians, clinicians, and researchers focusing on autistic sexuality, why individuals on the spectrum and individuals who are neurodivergent often receive inadequate medical care and do not have their sexual needs addressed appropriately. And there are many barriers that cause this. And I'm also going to provide a rationale for developing a sex education curriculum for people on the spectrum, which is something I just did in my work at Rutgers University. So I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. So a little bit about me. I'm not going to go through all of this, but as I mentioned, I work as a relationship coach at the Rutgers Center for Adult Autism Services. I'm an international public speaker. I've been called the Taylor Swift of autism, which is probably the first and last time I'll ever be compared to Taylor Swift. I've co-authored a book chapter on autism and sexuality with Dr. Peter Gerhardt and Dr. Jess Kauke. And I currently am serving as a founding member of Autism Speaks Emerging Leaders Initiative and on several different boards. And I'm the author of The Naughty Audie, which is my first book, which is a memoir of my experiences with dating as an autistic woman. But back before all of that, back in 1996, I was 13 years old. And like any other 13-year-old, I was in the throes of puberty. My body didn't care that I had autism, you see. My body didn't recognize the fact, oh, hey, she's disabled, therefore she shouldn't be going through puberty. Nope, all the same physical, biological changes. And like most other 13-year-olds, I began to develop crushes. And these were some of the crushes that I had at that time. And you might be wondering what Davy Jones from the Monkees is doing up there. I discovered the Monkees on Nick at Night Summer Block Party when I was 12, which it did wonders for my popularity, having pictures of a band that was popular 30 years earlier taped to my locker door. That's sarcasm. I'm autistic and I can use sarcasm. It did nothing for my popularity whatsoever. But as I say, going through the same changes, biological, physical, but I had nothing in the way of actual, tangible experience till I was 17. So puberty, going through all that, 12, 13, didn't have my first kiss till I was 17. And this sort of set the stage for a theme of disconnect that was present through much of my adolescence and adulthood, to be honest. The disconnect between the things I had curiosities about and any learning opportunities I had to explore those things. I wasn't going out on dates on Saturday nights. Boys were too busy calling me ugly to go anywhere near me. Nobody was kissing me under the bleachers. So that disconnect further presented itself as puberty, got into full swing. And in this form, it was kind of a disconnect from my own body, which I often compare to a balloon that's barely tethered to the earth, which we see here in this picture. I felt that I didn't belong in my body, that it didn't belong to me. And at the same time, I felt completely trapped in my own skin. Because my self-esteem was so low from the bullying I was experiencing, and I didn't believe that I was worth anything. And when you don't believe that you have worth and value as a person, it's very easy for someone to come in and say, oh, I see you, you're okay, you're great, I'll acknowledge you. And somebody else can come in and tell you who you are because you don't know who you are. Because I didn't have the opportunities necessarily to develop that same sense of self-awareness that my neurotypical peers were having. But again, because of all of this and because of everything that was happening, there was a lot of misunderstandings around how puberty did affect me. I think we misunderstand how puberty does affect autistic individuals. We don't expect neurotypical teenagers to perfectly, succinctly narrate articulately every single thing that's happened to them in order to believe that those things have happened to them. But we do expect that from autistic teenagers. And I'm not sure why. We put a burden on autistic teenagers to talk about their experiences, their hormones, their emotions that we don't do. And so the fact of the matter is that I was going through all the things that many of my peers were, but I had no idea that I wasn't alone. I had no idea that they were dealing with these things too. And because of everything that my parents and I were facing, navigating the bullying I was experiencing, trying to get support from the school, we never had the talk, the birds and the bees talk. Although I'm of the opinion that that's best left to the movies. I think that sex, it's not just one talk, it's many talks and conversations over the lifetime, or at least it should be. So, but I wound up, finding out about sex from kind of the two worst places I could because I didn't have that talk with my parents. So I learned from my peers and from the internet, which are not great sources. But when I was 19, I finally had my first boyfriend. It's a miracle, it's all I've ever wanted. But I needed to learn how to be a girlfriend. I didn't know what that meant. I have a master's degree in applied behavior analysis, and so I kind of made a task analysis out of what it meant to be a girlfriend. I have to laugh at his jokes, even if they're not funny. I have to go where he wants to go. I have to be nice to his parents. So I tried to play this role of a girlfriend, even though I was being myself, not that I was being someone else, but that disconnect reared its head again in the form of the difference between what was expected of me in a relationship versus what I might have been able to do. And so inevitably, he broke up with me, not once but twice, and it was kind of the worst thing I'd ever been through up till that point, although it was nothing compared to what was going to be coming next. I have so many more stories, but I just can't fit them all in the time. But it wasn't all bad, of course, no relationship is, and this was when I first became sexually active. And so that disconnect I mentioned earlier from my body, going through puberty, having my first menstrual period and looking down and not even realizing I had pubic hair, when I was being intimate with my first boyfriend, I remember looking down again and suddenly realizing that I did. And it was the first time I felt connected to my body. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have pubic hair. There's a lot of it. It's like the Black Forest. I should do something about that. But of course, he's like a chia pet. I don't get to say anything about that, which isn't really fair in my opinion. But it was the first moment that I not only saw myself as somebody that someone would want to have sex with, but that could also provide pleasure to someone else, which I didn't think would be possible. And so it became this kind of learning moment to get to know my body, to get to know myself, to be able to realize that my needs mattered just as much as someone else's. Although putting those and prioritizing those would take a lot longer. And so at the age of 22, I fell in love for the first time. And you might say, well, you had a boyfriend in college, weren't you in love with him? Well, no, because being an autistic person, I often have to prove that I feel the things that I feel, that I understand emotions, even though I understand them quite well. And I knew that I'd loved my college boyfriend, but I hadn't been in love with him. And so I met this guy, again, bad places on the internet, and I moved to Seattle, Washington, where he lived 3,000 miles from Pennsylvania, where I was in college. And I had opportunities in college to have sex, and I knew that I wasn't ready. And so I had him wear a white button-down shirt because I'd always wanted to unbutton a guy's shirt when we were going to make love. I had the music burned on the CD. I had the bottle of wine picked out. And you hear young people say that they're invincible, nothing can happen to them. Well, I'm autistic. Everything's happened to me. So I made sure to get on the pill before I moved out there. I waited the full month you're supposed to wait for the pill to kick in. I made sure that we had condoms. And I thought that I was super, super prepared. But here I am getting ready to have sex and thinking that I'm prepared, but I still was in that place of, if I screw this up, he'll never want to have sex with me again. No one will ever want to have sex with me again. I need feedback. I need to know if I've done some kind of a good job. And so I thought, well, when you eat at a restaurant or you stay at a hotel, they have these cards that you can fill out. And so I created a sexual intercourse comment card, which you can see here. And this is the front of the card. Tongue slightly in cheek, but completely very serious as well. And these were some of the questions. What did you enjoy most about the sex session? What do you think could have been better? Please rate the following from 1 to 5. The outfit I had on pre-intercourse, my facial expressions during intercourse, my volume. And there's a thing about these questions that I didn't really understand until much later, which is that they're all about his pleasure and enjoyment. There's nothing about my pleasure. And again, that's, I think, a position that we as women just find ourselves in society. Like I said, it's putting the needs of others ahead of our own. But mine were secondary if they were present in my mind at all at this point. So, in thinking about the experiences I've had, the question that came to my mind is how can we help autistic and neurodivergent people learn some of these skills and perhaps avoid some of the heartbreaks that I experienced? And so I decided to develop a sex education curriculum. Again, there's such a lack of kind of quantitative research at the moment out there about autism and sexuality. There's plenty of things about social skills, but so little about dating and sexuality skills. And much of this stems from things like infantilization, which is where we think about autistic adults as if they're children in big bodies. And we're not. We are adults. We just may need a little bit more help and support in this area in achieving our goals. And these stereotypes kind of are reinforced by the diagnostic criteria we use to talk about autism and the cultural and social biases that perpetuate taboos around autistic sexuality. So this was my team at Rutgers, without whom the curriculum would not have been possible. And we worked on this for about a year, all told, 2 years, excuse me. That's how long it took. We just reported out back in January of this year, February. And so we modified a curriculum that existed at Rutgers called ANSWER, which is the oldest sex ed curriculum in the country. And we conducted stakeholder interviews and looked at preparedness for sex through the lens of healthy relationships and personal safety, which are two of the content areas in the National Sexuality Education Standards. So that was what we ended up focusing on, and we had many different content areas that we covered within this. And a lot of them, had to do with what is a boundary, what is a value, talking about anatomy and physiology, talking about the sexual response cycle. We talk about sensory challenges, navigating sensory issues during sex, which many autistic people are likely to encounter. And of course, we had some limitations around the curriculum. One of the great things was that we incorporated autistic communication. We didn't just say this is the way to do this. We said this is what neurotypicals may expect, but this is how can we incorporate your autistic communication to help you achieve this particular goal. So it's really a foundation for the future. It's really something that we're hoping is really starting conversations among professionals and parents. And so thinking about what you can do in your practice as you leave here today. When we talk about autism and sexuality, it's almost always through the lens of safety. But we also need to think about empowerment, right? Teaching people not just who can touch them and who can't, and boundaries, but also about pleasure, because sex is supposed to feel good. And we don't talk about that nearly often enough when we talk about disability and sexuality. We talk about prevention a lot, preventing STIs or unwanted pregnancies, but like I said, we leave out that piece. And also about reproductive choices, right? That we as autistic people have the right to choose. Do we want to have children? Do we not want to have children? And there's such a history, I think, of forced sterilization that has been so harmful for autistic and neurodivergent people. So putting that control back into our hands is crucially important. And making sure that we know that we're the ones who are the experts on our bodies and not someone else. And again, this idea of sexuality, but without shame, right? Shame is just too often tied to sex in our country. The legacy of the Pilgrims is literally giant belt buckles and sexual repression. That's what they left us 400 years later. It's not good. So we need to not pair sex and shame together. And again, people ask me, well, when should I start talking to a client or a child about this? And I always say earlier than you think. Meet the person where they are at the intersection of their chronological age and developmental level. What do they need to know for their age, and what is it they're interested in at this point in time? Assume competence, right? All too often we assume incompetence, that autistic and neurodivergent people are not competent to understand sexuality. But we are, but it's also not the same thing as comprehension, right? So someone can recite back information and facts, but it doesn't mean that they have the ability necessarily to comprehend those and apply those in other settings. That's a whole different skill set, and that may take a little bit more time. And of course, again, believing that autistic patients deserve exceptional medical care. We often hear the phrase adequate care. Adequate is not adequate. It simply isn't. It's not good enough. And if you wouldn't accept less than exceptional care for your child, your family, why would you accept it for the patients that you serve? The foundation upon which you provide treatment is just as important as the treatment you're providing. If you have limited knowledge of autism and neurodivergence, educate yourself, learn more, so you can better serve the patients you have. You likely already have autistic and neurodivergent patients, even if you don't know it. And don't they deserve the best possible care, just as your other patients do? I recently had surgery, the first I've had as an adult, other than having my tonsils out as a kid. And there was so much that I didn't even, and it was at Sloan Kettering, by the way, in New York. And they were really great, but it was still really scary. And so a few years ago, I had a cervical biopsy, and I was in no way prepared for the emotional effects of that, as well as the physical, what that would be like afterwards, sitting there feeling violated. No one told me about that. And then in the surgery as well, just the sensory issues that can arise in that type of setting because it's so new. How to navigate that, how to navigate a new place and new people and sights and sounds. Having some kind of a guide, even for when I would go into the center with visuals, would have been really helpful. But even what I did receive had too much information. The thing about the surgery I was receiving, it was about an oophorectomy, and I'm like, I'm not having my oofs rectomied. My ovaries aren't coming out. It's just this, and it's too much information. And so I got a little freaked out. So just being able to provide people with the information, only the information they need, and not overwhelming people either. And then here's just a few resources, just other curricula that exist. These are, and just a few last thoughts. Not acknowledging autistic and neurodivergent people as sexual being often becomes an excuse to deny the need for sex education for autistic and neurodivergent people, and that's not acceptable. That pipeline has been going on for far too long, and people assume that because an adult may not be comfortable with giving answers, it means that an autistic individual, child, teenager doesn't have questions, and that's simply not true. If my questions as a child had been taken a bit more seriously and had been treated as if they mattered, it would have made it easier for me to believe that I mattered as an adult. You have the opportunity to lay the groundwork, the foundation, whether you're a clinician, a physician, a parent, you have that opportunity to make a difference in the lives of your neurodivergent and autistic patients. So why not do that? And I just love this quote from Frida Kahlo, al final del día podemos soportar más de lo que creemos, which means at the end of the day, we endure far more than we think we can. And I think that's been very true for autistic and neurodivergent individuals as we try to navigate a world that's not built for people like us, that doesn't accept people like us, that doesn't want to see people like us as sexual beings. Help us, help make things easier for us, because you have that power. This is my contact information. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that excellent presentation. We'll take questions after all four have presented, and so I'd like to invite Jalen Ricks up to the podium, and he's going to talk about